The other day, the True Puka made a video about refuting the ontological argument. And the ontological argument is one of my favorite arguments in favor of God's existence because it's so exquisitely stupid. And he mentioned how people like William Lane Craig like to trip people up on the details of refuting that argument. Like a lot of people bring up Kant's refutation, but they don't know it well enough to really communicate it clearly. What the ontological argument essentially says is that God is defined as the greatest thinkable thing. Like, think of the greatest thing you can possibly conjure in your mind. That is God. And God must exist because if you think of the greatest thing you possibly can, then you must think of it as existing. If you're really thinking about the greatest being you can possibly think about, you have to think of that being as existing, because existing is greater than not existing. Therefore, if you have an accurate understanding of what God essentially is, you must believe that God exists. Now, Immanuel Kant, who was himself a Christian, actually brings up a couple of objections to this argument. One of them is questioning why existing is greater than not existing. Because a lot of people who put forward this argument, they don't really explain what they mean by greater. What do you mean when you say something is greater than something else? Why is something that exists necessarily greater than something that does not? His second objection is somewhat more complicated. It's basically that you can't simply define existence into a concept. You can't just make something exist by adding existence to its definition. And this is essentially what the ontological argument does. It basically says that the very concept of God denotes existence. And a few years ago, when I was in college and I was trying to come up with a simple way to explain this objection to people, I came up with something I call the realicorn. Now, the realicorn, as I define it, is exactly the same thing as a unicorn, except it really exists. It exists by definition. Now, if you have a full and accurate understanding of what a realicorn is, you must believe in it. Because if you think that you're thinking about a realicorn, but you're actually thinking of it as something that does not exist, you're not really thinking of a realicorn. You're just thinking of a unicorn. To think of the very concept of the realicorn is to believe that it exists. To accurately hold the concept of the realicorn in your consciousness, you must think of it as existing. If you were to say something like, the realicorn does not exist, that statement could not possibly be true. It would be a contradiction in terms, because the realicorn, by definition, exists. And after hearing this explanation of what a realicorn is anybody out there convinced that a realicorn actually does exist? This is the essence of the ontological argument. It doesn't work because simply adding existence to the definition of a thing does not conjure it into existence. Using the ontological argument to prove the existence of God and using the argument I just used to prove the existence of the realicorn are equally stupid.